Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kathy Peterson, Director of Public Information and Community Engagement here at Explore Asheville Convention and Visitors Bureau. I don't think that, a few months ago when we first did this that we thought we would be doing another town hall about how to operate in this pandemic, but here we are again. Today is August 31st. And thank you for joining and wanting to operate safely, operate your businesses safely. Some of you attended a town hall back in May that we hosted for event venues and attractions. And then after that, we got a lot of requests to host a town hall in June specific to the wedding industry. And today, once again, we bring you almost face-to-face with our Buncombe County experts to answer more of your questions. So tag teaming with me today is my colleague, Beth McKinney, whom many of you know, but Beth, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yes. Hey, everybody. I'm Beth McKinney. I'm the wedding sales manager here at Explore Asheville. Really, this kind of second installment of the town hall for the wedding industry came because we heard from many of you that there are still questions out there and some concerns. So thank you so much for staying open and communicative with us so that we can hopefully help communicate what we need to all of you. So thank you.
Thanks, Beth. And I'd also like to acknowledge our behind the scenes colleagues, Jonna and Daniel. They're doing their best to keep these Zoom webinars going. And so thanks to Jonna and Daniel. And now we'll turn it over to Fletcher Tove, Public Health Emergency Preparedness Director, Jessica Silver, Environmental Health Administrator, and Tim Love, Intergovernmental Affairs from Buncombe County. As they go through their presentation and some of the frequently asked questions, we invite you all to use the chat function if you have additional questions or need clarifications, and we'll do our best to get those answered in the time we have here. Tim, Jessica, Fletcher, thank you as always for all the help you've given us, and we will turn it over to you now.
Hey, great. Thanks, Kathy. Appreciate that. Good to be here with everyone again. Hopefully get some of your questions answered. Help you guys navigate some of the guidance. Unfortunately, there is still some gray area and lack of clarity in parts of the guidance, but we're going to try to work through that. And go ahead and go to next slide. So just recapping, since our last town hall, guidance hasn't changed. We're still in phase 2 orders. If you recall back to executive order number 141 from the state. So that means we have gathering limits of 10 persons indoors, 25 outdoors, restaurants at 50% capacity with some closures. I will note that, we'll get to that in a second, but we're still, everything kind of catch all, for everything, the 3 W's apply, whether you're allowed to operate or not. Wear cloth face coverings, wait 6 feet apart, and wash your hands with sand or use hand sanitizer. There's some guidance down on this page that you can look at if you want to refresh your memory, or for some resources on our buncombeready.org page. You go to next slide. So just want to recap about when we're talking about wedding industry specifically, what we're looking at. So we know in the governor's executive orders, there's the exception for First Amendment freedom of religion for the actual ceremony part of the wedding itself, where mass gathering guidance does not apply. But in that order, in the accompanying FAQ document, it makes it very clear that outside the actual ceremony itself, the receptions, the rehearsal dinners, all that stuff, the mass gathering guidance does apply. So what that means is if you guys are coordinating a wedding that has more than 10 people or 25, depending on whether you're inside or outside, that party has to have a transition plan. You have to help coordinate a transition plan from whether they have 100 people attending the ceremony. When they go to the reception, that reception is back under mass gathering limits. 10 people inside, 25 people outside. And I'll address this in a little bit, but if you have space for 6 feet distancing and you have multiple rooms, you can have 10 people per room, but that doesn't mean that if you have 4 rooms, that doesn't mean you can say just 40 people anywhere. That's 10 people per room without mingling. So if people go to an assigned room where they stay. And I'll touch on that in a little bit as we get to questions. Yeah, so there is some of these receptions that are hosted in a place. It can be a restaurant or any place with a graded restaurant kitchen facility from environmental health, meaning they have one of those health scores. They can operate under the restaurant guidance, which means 50% capacity. But that means that 50% capacity has to be in that location. You can't have a venue with a restaurant on it saying you're using restaurant guidance and then go use a different part of the venue or have the service in a different part. That 50% capacity applies to the restaurant portion of that venue, and it has to be an operation. Just because it's a restaurant doesn't mean you can say 50% capacity and you're still catering or you're still, doing a different event. That guidance isn't like a catch-all. It's specifically if you're using the restaurant function of that kitchen on that specific site. And again, 3 Ws, whether you're allowed to operate or not, whether you're using an approved venue, whatever, whether you have 10 people or 100, the 3 Ws still apply. Take us to our next slide, please. So this is where we get into one of the gray areas. In Section 8 of the Executive Order number 141, you'll recall that put in Phase 2, there is specifically closure for venues for receptions or parties. But if you remember just a couple slides ago, it said that meeting and event spaces are limited to mass gathering guidance. And we've reached out to the state for clarification between those two, and we haven't got any clear guidance from the state about how you distinguish between a venue for a reception versus a venue for an event. So if you go to the next slide, I think that's our first question. Well, just let me talk on this real quick, specifically to restaurants. So if they are operating under restaurant guidance, what that means. So 50% of max fire capacity or 12 people for every 1,000 square feet. Whatever that revised emergency maximum capacity is, it has to be posted, and the order says in a conspicuous location. So we're asking that's like at the front entrance or the front doors. Whatever that 50% number is, you have that printed out and posted. You have to have signage about the 3 Ws. You have to have 6 feet market in high traffic areas. So if there is some kind of table set up where you're expecting more traffic, or there is a bar, that's where you have to have those 6 feet high traffic areas marked. Again, high cleaning and hygiene and sanitation procedures. And everybody should be, particularly employees, have to be screened on a daily basis. There needs to be signage posted about if you're symptomatic, don't come in. And people should be asking their attendees to self-screen, self-monitor, and not come into the event, reception or ceremony if they're not feeling well. I thought I saw somebody just posted something. Let me read this real quick. Yeah, so that's if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about that contradiction in that language that we've asked the state to clarify and still haven't heard back from them. So am I allowed to host ceremonies on site? Because it says that if I'm a venue for receptions or parties, we're closed, but also in other parts of the guidance, it says if you're an event meeting space, you can operate under mass gathering guidance. So we're saying that until we have clarification from the state, you guys can operate with the mass gathering guidance. So as an event meeting place, because we're not aware of anywhere where it defines the difference between a party venue, an event venue, a reception venue. So you guys can operate for not the ceremony, because that's no restrictions, but the receptions, the rehearsal dinners, any other kind of tangential events, the mass gathering guidance of 10 people indoors and 25 people outdoors. Next slide. So if my venue has multiple rooms, can I have 10 people in each room as long as I keep everyone separate? Yes, there is provision in those orders that if you have, the caveat is you still have to have space for that 6 foot of distancing. So you have to have that square footage for 10 people. But yes, you can have people in different rooms. But I just want to clarify That again, if you have 4 rooms, that doesn't mean you get to just say for that building, we get 40 people and then put 40 people in there. That's 10 people to a dedicated room, and you need to reduce the mingling to the most reasonable extent possible. So that means if you're having food in one area, you don't want everybody mingling, or at a bar. These people are coming in, they're assigned to a room, and they're in that room. We don't want people coming in and just mingling and exchanging between the rooms. Next question. Are masks required in event venues? Yes. So for the ceremony itself, again, no requirements. We ask that anyone obviously we're not asking people involved in the ceremony, like the bridegroom, wedding party. During that, they don't necessarily have to be in masks, but the rest of the people in attendance should be at 6-foot distance, wearing masks, and doing all the sanitation and hygiene. And the same thing goes for the receptions. Obviously, when people are sitting down eating and drinking, they're not going to have masks on. But when people are getting up from their tables, just like in a restaurant, because that's the restaurant guidance, we're asking them to put their mask back on as they're going to and from the bathroom, as they're getting up to participate in different things. Obviously, people are probably, as you do like photos and stuff, people are going to want to take their photos off for masks. Just try to remember that distancing, have a separate place for that. And as people are transiting, just work your best with them. So when people aren't be able to maintain that consistent 6 feet, they have a face covering on. Next question. So if I have a commercial kitchen or tap room on site, can that operate like a restaurant? So I want to make a clarification here. So the restaurant, you have to have the kitchen and Jessica can speak to this in a moment, but you have to have the graded kitchen from the health department, from environmental health. A tap room itself doesn't qualify you to operate under restaurant guidance. If it happened to be a distillery or a winery, they do have the exception to also operate under restaurant guidance. But just because you have beer taps on site alone does not allow you to operate under that guidance. Jessica, you want to hop on and clarify about what that health grading score comes from or anything like that?
Sure. So if a place has, we call it a 2600 permit or a food service establishment permit, then they're considered a commercial kitchen, and you will see or should see a posted grade near the entrance of the establishment. And if you all have any questions about any facilities and whether a facility that you are considering is a graded facility, you can call our office at 250-5016, and we can do a search of all of our establishments to just verify that you could verify, just so that we could verify that that location could host a reception underneath the restaurant's capacity limits.
Great. All right, thanks. And we go to the next slide. So are the current regulations a guideline or mandatory? So everything we're explaining to you guys is part of the executive order. So it's not just guidelines, they're mandated from the governor. How they enforced, that's a separate question. So we haven't done enforcement on this industry at all, because we do these town halls. We feel like a lot of you guys are doing your best to operate under this guidance, trying to give you guys clarification where it's needed. We have recently established, I don't know if you guys saw on the news, a enforcement kind of guidance task force with local law enforcement, who is the sole entity who can enforce these are local law enforcement, whether that's sheriff's department or APD. So as part of that task force, we've opened up to restaurants. We're using it to do some work with gyms now. And if we get to the point where we need to do this with wedding industry, that would be how we would enforce that through that task force. I will say, we've had hotels reporting to us when they're getting requests for large bookings of more than 25 people. So that's one way we can monitor. But generally, we don't want to be forced to come out. I mean, we're busy enough as it is, and we have law enforcement's busy. If we need to, we'll apply that task force and monitor this, but we're really asking is your guys' compliance. If you have questions or need more clarification, we'll do the best we can. Where there are still those gray areas, we're still waiting to hear back from the state. We know September 11th, we may change some of this guidance, so we're kind of looking to see what happens then as well. But that's really the instancy we have for enforcing that is through that task force that was established a couple weeks ago. If you want to go to the next slide. So how can I address concerns about wedding vendors who may not be following the mandate correctly? So you can always reach out and let them know if they're not clear on the mandate. They can reach out to us for clarification. But also, if you have concerns about people who maybe are aware and just disregarding or operating with the wrong intent, or they just don't understand the guidance, you can always report those to ready@buncombecounty.org. That's READY @buncombecounty.org. That's where we're compiling all our complaints and reports of violations, and we assess those. We take everything at face value, and we'll follow up at individual levels just to check base with the owners, taking things with a grain of salt. But that's the best venue for getting it to public health, where we could farm that stuff out to that task force or reach out to clarify stuff, is that ready@buncombecounty.org. And I think that was the last of the set questions we had.
That was, and Fletcher, there's been
Yeah.
some questions that have come in on the chat
Yes.
here. Meg Conway, I'll start with her because she's got a few in here. They all go together.
Yeah.
Asking, I don't know if I had a chance to read that yet, but it's talking about restaurants. Let's see, restaurant guidelines assume that clients are there only to interact with their table. At a reception, all the guests are there to interact with each other. It thus makes sense that a restaurant would have to follow the mass gathering limits when they're hosting a wedding reception. Not a normal restaurant setting, but a wedding reception. And she provided the language there from Executive Order 141. Let's see, I can read that for everybody here. Mass gathering limit of 10 people indoors or 25 people outdoors. This limit applies regardless whether the event takes place in a restaurant, in a conference center, in a hotel ballroom, in a venue that is used exclusively for receptions or parties, or in some other space open under this executive order. So it sounds as though she might need some clarification maybe about how that's different from what you're saying in regards to venues who are open under restaurant guidelines.
Right. So if the clarification is if they're operating under that 50% restaurant guidelines, they're operating as a restaurant. That means there's not social spaces, there's not dance floors, there are people seated at a table, there's table service. They have that's the restaurant guidance. If it's transitioning and they're asking to do something like she points out, and I saw that question just pop in as well, if people are trying to do traditional wedding things like dance floors, photo booths, open bars, and things like that, that's where we come back, and that's no longer restaurant guidance. That's 10 people indoors, 25 outdoors. If it's being used as a event venue. Does that make sense? So maybe that's what I need to clarify. When we say they can use a restaurant, that restaurant guidance with a kitchen, that means operating as a restaurant, not as an event. So table service, people seated down, people assigned the tables, without those social functions you would expect to see at a normal reception. I hope that clarifies. Well, Tim, you want anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll chime in. What Fletch is saying is, our interpretation of the guidance, and we've asked for additional guidance from the state on this, is that restaurants that are venues that are permitted through environmental health as a restaurant have the ability to act as a restaurant and specifically follow restaurant guidelines, as Fletch said. This doesn't mean that it's a loophole that now that you have a restaurant that's permitted, you get to have a large dance floor with people mingling and doing all of the things that spread COVID-19. So, what we're asking for y'all to do is to, interpret the guidance. If you have questions, ask us, and we're trying to be helpful and not over-regulate on this, but we need your help to ensure that we can keep venues open by following guidance in a way that clearly seeks to mitigate the risk of spreading COVID-19. So that's the ask of us to y'all.
Yeah, I see a couple more questions pop up. One specifically about breweries. So breweries, distilleries, wineries, where they're producing on site, also have that 50% capacity, but that falls under that same guidance. So you still have to have the 6 feet. You still have to have people assigned to locations, not those social aspects. So just people just serving beer or just serving wine don't hit that requirement unless they're producing on site, which is kind of like the how to differentiate that to make it a true brewery, not just a bar, or a true distillery, not just a bar again. Do these guidelines apply to clients who have a party at their private home? The mass gathering guidance does apply whether you're at a private location or a public place. So still 10 people indoors, 25 people outdoors. Monroe has a really good question. It's a difficult question, but our venues, Asheville's a wedding destination. We're North Carolina, in the grand scheme of things, is taking this very seriously. Buncombe County is taking this very seriously and have more stringent guidelines. You guys are competing against other states, and even some venues who aren't interpreting it the same way. So how as a community can we work to get what we need and what we're doing? So I think step one is having these town forums where we can address questions, see what questions we can answer so we can get further clarification from the state, and self-policing. Just remember the bigger picture of why we're doing all this is we have a aggressive disease, a global pandemic, and we're trying to protect particularly our most vulnerable, but everyone, so that we can get through this faster and get back to life as normal as soon as possible. So just keep in mind that when we see all these 180,000 deaths we've had in the country, you have to ask yourselves, how are these people getting affected? How does it keep getting in the nursing homes? Or how does it go into these high-risk populations? It's from community spread. And things like this, where you're pulling people together from different regions, different states, into a gathering, is one of the prime reasons why we're having so much widespread. And then it becomes part of the community. The people staffing those events, the people who live locally, carry on their day-to-day routines. They're going shopping, they're going to the barber, they're taking their kids to and from school, and it just transmits through the community. So that's the idea is we're trying to limit these gatherings as much as possible to reduce that community transmission. And we're trying to do so in a way following the state guidance, but also allow you guys to operate to a reasonable degree, understanding that you guys have businesses and your livelihoods on the line as well, and make accommodations the best we can for that. But really, I think just the communication, we'll also continue to answer questions the best we can, reach out to state for further guidance when we can, and then keep doing this. And like I said, September 11th is coming up. That's the current executive order's expiration date. It's looking like we're going to have 2 weeks of good data to support the governor if he chooses to change some of his guidelines. We don't know if he will yet or how they might change, but September 11th is a date that week of September 11th. We're looking really closely, and if things do change, we'll be digesting that language as soon as possible and pushing out, interpreting it for you guys and pushing it out. Make sure we can allow you guys to operate to the full extent of what the state orders are.
Fletcher, I'll give you a chance to read some questions too and answer the one that came in that said, do vendors count towards the guest count or what I believe you mean as the mass gathering limitation count. And yes, they do. So that's something to keep in mind. If you have 10 people inside for some type of reception or party, you would want to make sure that that includes the person that's serving the food to them and anyone else who may be a part of that in some way.
Yeah, I mean, if we're thinking about the reason for doing this, a person breathing is a person breathing. When we're talking about the head counts, it doesn't matter if they're part of the event or they're working the event. They're a person that is a mode of transmission. See it suggested language from newlyweds that want a table hop. So clearly these are highly social events. I think they just need to, as they're table hopping, that's where the masks come into play. That's where the 6 feet distancing comes into play. That's where the 15 minutes of cumulative time together. So as they're transitioning through, don't linger too long. Keep your distance. Do the best you can. Anytime we can open doors, open windows, increase ventilation is going to help. As anytime they're transiting around, hand hygiene and sanitation, just general hygiene and sanitation are always going to help. Just scrolling through some other questions here.
Hey Fletch, there's a question here from Tara talking about venues that are ignoring the rules and the impact of that on the community, and the need for enforcement. And I think you've already kind of summarized where we are on enforcement. Our goal is not to have local law enforcement patrolling wedding venues on the weekends to make sure that people are complying with mass gathering guidance. When we were beginning to see issues with restaurants, in particular restaurants that began to behave less as restaurants where there's table seating and behaving more as, we'll call them bars, where there's lots of folks mingling. We were forced to create a task force that literally went around on Friday and Saturday nights to check on specific locations. And so our goal is not to do that. And we don't want to do that with this industry, but we had to because we continued to hear complaints from the industries themselves about other industries that were not complying. And that's not the kind of community we want to build, but was a response. I'd also add, and we didn't speak to it yet in this call, but the initial response was to cut hours and implement an alcohol curfew, which I think some of you have probably read about. And that would have been even more damaging to all restaurants, not just those that were sort of violating the order. So again, the ask for y'all is to help us work together to kind of address these issues and continue to mitigate community spread.
And I'll also jump on that and saying again, this one's a little different to enforce because some of them are set venues, some of them are just different places where they could get scheduled. So it's like a restaurant. We know where the restaurant is. We get reports of them. So if you do have specific concerns, push them to ready@buncombecounty.org, and we can follow up on them that way to the best of our ability.
There's an easy question that was towards the beginning of this. Are some states still requiring people who visit North Carolina for weddings to quarantine? I think that's a pretty quick and easy answer there.
Yeah, so I can't speak to other states. As a state, we don't have that quarantine restriction for people coming in. If you recall, Buncombe County for a couple months, I think in April, May, we're asking people to do a 2-week quarantine as they came in. We don't have that as a requirement anymore, but we do ask people to do that. Anytime you're traveling, we're asking people to be aware and monitor themselves for symptoms and temperature screenings, sense of smell, sense of taste, that kind of thing. And this is where you guys can really help at the field level as you guys are meeting with these families and planning the events, and you guys are putting out messaging and planning on bringing these people together. As part of these, I just got a invite for a wedding, later in the winter, but as part of that RSVP card came, a separate card that said, these are the restrictions in place. They may change by the time this event happens. You guys RSVP now, but remember, you have to monitor your symptoms as you come in, and we're asking if you're not feeling well, have it up on my fridge. If you're not feeling well, to, just not come, and we'll, do something else for you. But that's the kind of communications we need from you guys, letting people know that if they're symptomatic the week of or the week before, they're not feeling well, they need to avoid these events, because we're going to have a super spreader coming into one of these weddings and ceremonies, and then we have 2-3 dozen people sick, going back to all different parts of the state, different parts of the country. And that's just how this disease continues.
There's actually proof that has happened in other states.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've seen. Go ahead. Sorry, Beth.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, we've seen multiple case studies of, specifically weddings and funerals where we know there's super spreader events, and they could trace back multiple cases to those. So that's what we're really trying to. We think if you guys follow the guidelines with the mass gathering and the 6 feet distancing and all the hand sanitation guidelines, we can really reduce that opportunity for transmission. Because we know when it doesn't happen, we've seen these super spreading events.
And also maybe, go ahead, Jessica.
No, I was going to piggyback off of that and pull in the question about someone stating that the whole wedding event is the religious gathering. I think, we need to be really mindful of why these precautions are in place, because of how easily COVID is spread. And I do know that there have been some pockets of outbreaks across the country as a result of religious gatherings or normal times at church. So it's something to think about. I think people are really trying to be creative in how they create a loophole so that things don't apply to them. But I think it's going to take the whole community working together. And I hear and read what you all are saying in the chat about people who are just not paying attention and just choosing to ignore the guidance. And we have to reach them some way. The task force that's created and hearing you all's complaints on each other, I'm hoping that will help us make some headway in reaching those people.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just back to the communication piece. And I see that statement from Ellie Schwartz. I totally agree. We are, whether it's this industry or any industry, as we get the guidelines, as we push our guidance and our interpretations, I just want to assure you guys that a part of every single conversation is the impact on local industry, local economics. Public health and protecting people is driving this conversation. But those aspects come up in every single meeting, every single engagement we have. They're the forefront of our conversations, because we realize, I keep saying we're having a tug of war between protecting people's lives and then protecting people's livelihoods, and understanding, as we restrict one, we're kind of restricting them both at the same time. So just reassure you guys that we're constantly talking about that. When we talk to state and when Tim's reaching out to our groups, we're constantly talking about the local impact on local families, local businesses, local economy. And that's why we need everybody on board, because in the long run, we're going to get back to normal faster if everyone works together to get over this hump. We're still flattening a curve, as opposed to if we just kind of let it run its course over the next year. Lisa, I just saw your question pop in about taking temperatures. So I think it's a great idea if you can, as people come in, do a quick screening of them. Temperature checks are good, but ultimately they have to go hand in hand with questions about symptoms, because the temperature checks, turns out maybe sometimes it's half the people who have COVID-19 will never display a fever as a symptom. So it's an indicator, but it's not a really great one. What's more important than just the temperatures is asking people those questions about specific symptoms if they've had them. And that might mean, unfortunately, the day before or at the event, you might have to ask some people not to attend, and that's going to be hard. But again, remember the reason we're doing this. Yeah, and really, whether you're indoors or outdoors, you should be doing that. People kind of, there's this impression I think I get from a lot of groups that just because you're outdoors, they think it kind of negates all of this. And while it does, the studies show that it does severely limit the ability to transmit, there's still a high potential of transmission if you're outside in that close contact criteria, which is 6 feet or less for 15 minutes cumulative. Meaning you might spend 10 minutes with some person now and then come back 10 minutes later and spend another 10 minutes with them. So that long exposure for 15 more minutes at a 6 foot or less distance, whether it's indoors or outdoors, has a high probability of transmission. So don't get into the mindset that just because we're outside, we're protected. You still have to wear masks. You still have to keep your distance.
Yeah, and just like Fletcher said, there are hard conversations that have to happen among all of us in the wedding industry as we work together, or just hear of things happening. Just speak up to one another first. I think that I do think that everyone agrees that we want to be safe and we don't want to be a part of the wedding that spread COVID-19. So having those hard conversations with each other is important, also with the couples that you're working with, because I think a lot of times you feel like you can't disappoint the couples that you're working with by trying to explain to them some of these guidelines or these mandates. And explaining to them that if you choose to have your wedding set up a certain way, you may need to ask them to be screened before coming into your wedding. That might maybe change their mind about how they even want to pull this event off, hopefully wanting to do it a little bit more safely. So if we can all get together, get on board. I know many of you are already trying to have those conversations with each other. Thank you for that. Then we can get past this, like Fletcher said, much faster.
Thanks, Beth. I saw one question about the screening again, so I'll answer that one. I saw a couple more pop up I'll get back to. But Jennifer's asking if there's any HIPAA laws or issues if we screen attendees, take temperature, ask screening questions. So if you use, when we can provide this, Buncombe County has developed a screening tool with questions, and I know the state has one as well that are specifically designed to not cross any HIPAA or privacy lines. So I recommend using those. You can find them on buncombeready.org. And we'll also push them over to Kathy and her team to distribute. But those are designed specifically so you can just read right through them and you're not going to violate any HIPAA or privacy issues. Popping back up, is there any indication what phase 2 or what the next phase might look like after September 11th? So unfortunately, we in public health and local government don't get any more of a heads up than you guys do. A lot of times, we're tuning into the press conference live with the governor to find out just as you guys are. Sometimes we get a little 30 minutes or hour heads up. Sometimes we got like a 30 minutes after heads up, hey, this is going to happen. So we don't have any special pipeline of information. But I will say the way our trends in this, because locally we're monitoring the same trends the state are. 4 key metrics. I just briefly remind you what those they are. They're influenza, or now that's COVID-like symptoms that are reported to hospitals, the number of positive cases, the percentage positive cases of tests done. So, our ratio of tests to positive cases, and hospital capacity. So locally in the state, our numbers are starting to look pretty good. We're seeing a little decline in a bunch of our numbers, which is a good thing. So I think at September 11th, the state keeps looking at this 2-week, 14-day window. They say we need 14 days of good data to move us. I think we haven't had it the last couple rotations, so we've extended phase 2. It looks like we might meet the criteria on September 11th, to transition to something else. That doesn't necessarily mean that Governor Cooper is going to take us out of phase 2. He might say, we need to stay on it here. He may go to like a 2.5 where he changes things a little bit less restrictions, or we might go to a full phase 3. We don't know. Once we get that information, we'll have to process it here locally and determine what's best for Buncombe County. What I will say though is, these are my personal impressions, is I can't imagine us this year getting above mass gatherings of 50 or maybe 100. I don't think in North Carolina we'll see mass gatherings above 100 this year, and that's just my personal guess on that. We very well could see changes in guidance to bars and gyms. We could see some other changes in capacity for restaurants or event venues, but we don't know. We haven't had an indication from the state yet. Charlie's asking about symptoms to check for. So we'll push that screening tool to Kathy as well. That the symptoms, change from time to time. I think there's like 8 or 9 symptoms to check for now. But I will say, and this is a tricky one, but studies show that one of the best leading indicators is a loss of smell and a loss of taste. And we've been brainstorming about, we suggested to some groups about having like scented candles or like really strong fragrance things to spray and just see if people can identify them. And that's not maybe something necessarily you would do for your events. Like maybe you could have candles or flowers and see if people can smell them or not. But that's one of the leading indicators, it seems like, that's pretty consistent, is people having a loss of taste or a loss of smell. So what you can do is, as people, are sending out these invites and saying, self-screen yourself, self-monitor. If you're not feeling well that week, don't come to the event. Add that, like if you're experiencing a loss of taste or smell. And I think that's on the updated information we push out. And again, I'll push that to Kathy so we get that out to this group. Megan's asking, say that the screening's recommended but not required. It's not required, but I will say the exception. If you're operating in a place that's using restaurant guidance, or you're operating in a venue, it is required for staff. So guests it isn't required for, but staff, like at a restaurant, have to do daily screenings in the restaurant, or operations should already be doing that. I think that's most of the questions. Tim, do you have anything else you want to add?
Not really. I think this is really hard, and I think everyone knows that. And those of us that are married and have had receptions and know how impossible it is to really try to do this without folks mingling and bride and grooms or whoever's getting married sharing with one another. These are really highly personal events, and so we understand that, and I just want y'all to know that we understand that. With that said, we unfortunately are in a position where guidance is relatively clear from the state level. Our interpretation of it is as lenient as I think we can be at this point. We've asked for additional clarification, and so we'll do the best we can working with y'all. So that's all I have to add. So.
Yeah, and understanding it's difficult and it's hard. I'm just asking you guys to do your best. Continue to reach out if you need more clarification and guidance. And if you do have specific concerns, please push them to us and we'll follow up on them.
Before we go to the next slide, there's one more question. Who is required to monitor screening questions for event staff? The staffing company or the venue that they are working in?
Yeah, so that requirement is for anybody operating under that restaurant guidance, whether it's a brewery or a restaurant. They're required to screen their staff daily. That's been in place for months, so they should all be on board with that. So there's not, if you're bringing in event staff, I haven't seen that written as a requirement, but it would definitely be a best practice. Like if you have, I don't know what staff you might be bringing in, but doing a screening form. And again, you could download ours. We'll push it to you guys. Just use that as a baseline. You can just email it to them beforehand and say, hey, I need you to review this. Make sure you're not experiencing any of these things. And ultimately, that's also, a trust issue. Like, you're trusting that people, if they have a symptom, they're going to report it and take that guidance and not come.
Okay, well, before we
Here,
wrap up, go
I've
ahead.
seen Monroe asking about Executive Order 151. Hey, go ahead, Kathy. Let me look that up while you guys are.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide for a minute, and then we'll come back to that question. Just wanted to let y'all know that we're having another webinar on Wednesday, day after tomorrow, if y'all can believe that September will be here already. At 10 o'clock a.m., we have an attorney who has done work with the North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association. She is going to be presenting a free webinar on creating a 5-step action plan for how to handle anti-mask guests. Now, obviously, this is for the wider business community. So, whether if you know someone that operates, a retail establishment, a restaurant, bar, brewery, whatever the case may be, if you have someone who is acting belligerently about the request to wear a mask, she is providing tips on how to deal with that. So that's a free seminar. Anybody can come to that. Go to AshevilleCVB.com. Under the events tab, you'll see it at the top of the page, the events tab, or if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see a post there that will take you to the Zoom webinar registration. We do have limited seats, but we still have space. So I hope that y'all will help us spread the word about that. If it's not something that you're interested in yourself, that you will still help us spread the word, because I think, as someone has said, as a community, we're trying to work together to keep everyone safe. People that work here, people that live here, people that visit here. So I hope that y'all will sign up for that. Fletch, are you ready to answer the question?
Yeah, this Monroe was asking for some clarification on 151. Yeah, so that 151 took out from Section 8A restrictions, the closures of receptions and party venues. So you're right. So they fall back under general mass gathering guidance of 10 or 25. I hope that answers your question. So you're right that party and reception venue is no longer specifically closed in phase 2. And then Lisa, I hope that, Monroe, if that answers your question, or if you need more clarification, just shoot another message. If an independent cake baker wants to drop off a cake, who monitors or screens that vendor? So nobody's screening that cake vendor. What you can do, if you coordinate that, you could ask them what their procedures are and their policy is. You could have them come drop it off in a way that they're not interacting with others. But a cake baker whoever's making that, if it's a business, should be self-screening their employees. There's no requirement for them to, but you just have to coordinate with them, make sure that you trust that they're taking the steps necessary to ensure their safety for their staff, which in turn is going to ensure safety for your staff.
Okay, Monroe, you need help translating. I don't know what to tell y'all about that.
Yeah, if Monroe, if you want to, you could email me directly or email through Kathy. And I'm not sure exactly. I thought I addressed what you're looking at in 151, but I could take a further look if there's a. Oh yeah, if you just want to let them talk, that's fine too. And
everyone should know that we are recording this today. So if you need to listen to it again, we will have it up on our website probably by tomorrow. I know that some of you came to an earlier, the earlier town halls, and it took us a while to get those posted. Since then, Zoom is all we do. And so I think we can be a little bit faster about that. Daniel, if you want to go to the next slide, closing thoughts. Anybody have anything else before we wrap it up? Oh, Beth says we're going to allow you to speak if you'd like. Do we have time to do that?
We have a few minutes left. I'm going to see here. Maybe we can allow Monroe to actually speak on this call. If not, then we can definitely follow up after this call.
No, you just need to unmute, and if you can do that.
Putting him on the spot now.
Okay. You don't have to turn your camera on if you don't want to. Yeah. Well, while he's figuring that out, I'll just say again, thank you to Fletch, Tim, and Jessica for your dedication in keeping our community safe and helping businesses to continue to figure out how to work through all these challenges. We really appreciate your partnership and your willingness to spend time with us, because I know you have a lot of things going on with a lot of people, a lot of businesses having questions about what to do. And Monroe,
while we're waiting for that, can we go back a couple slides to I think it was slide 8. Maybe it's farther back. It was the one with the section 8 addressed with the party venues. Keep going.
I think it's just maybe one or two more.
Yeah, this one. So that's what Executive Order 151, that highlighted section, it took that out of section 2. So there's no specific closure for venues for receptions and parties. And that's what we had reached out for the state for clarification on. I didn't realize they put that in there. So you could disregard that. That's pulled out. So now it just fall under the 10-person guidelines for indoor, 25 for outdoor.
So can I speak?
Yeah.
We can hear
So
you.
in the E, when it says this limit applies regardless whether the event takes place in a restaurant, in a conference center, in a hotel ballroom, in a venue that is used exclusively receptions and parties.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter whether you're a venue or a restaurant, you're still limited to 10 and 25. Is that correct?
So this is how we're interpreting that. And so if it's as a reception or a party with the social aspects, yes, that's the 10 to 25. Where they can operate under restaurant guidance if it's being used as a restaurant, meaning people are assigned to tables and seats, and there's that lack of social interaction, no dance floor, no photo booths, no transiting back and forth, things like that. So I think that's where the difference is. If you're operating as a restaurant with that 50% guidance, you're truly, there having after ceremony dinner, as a restaurant, or if you're having it as a reception or party with those social aspects, that's when you're limited to 10 indoor or 25 outdoor.
May I ask a follow-up?
Yes. Does that clarify that part?
It is. I just want to make sure I'm asking enough questions.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that have to do with breweries?
So breweries, and forgive me, I can't remember it wasn't an executive order, it was an addendum to 141, I believe, that the governor said that allowed breweries and distilleries and wineries, if they produced product on site, meaning they just weren't tapping kegs, but they were actually bottling beer or bottling alcohol on site to fall under that restaurant guidance of 50% capacity.
Okay, so as I understand, 151 comes behind 141. So wouldn't 151 negate 141?
Again, I understand what you're saying, and that's not the interpretation of it. The interpretation of it is that restaurants, breweries, distilleries can operate at 50% capacity.
Okay.
And again, so that's operating under that restaurant guidance where people are assigned to locations or tables. There's not that social aspects. So that, and we get pushed that there's a specific guidelines for restaurant operation from August or from July 21st we can push, and that tells them exactly how to operate. And that's what breweries and distilleries have to follow as well. So it's some strict guidance about how they do masks, how they do distancing between tables, how they assign people to tables, what the servers and staff are required to do. So that's the guidance they're following.
Cool, I understand that, and thank you for helping. 151 caught us unaware. Can we get some support if things do change like that, and because it was so far down in the document?
Yeah, so we'll try to do a better job of that as we get these updates or changes to executive orders, pushing out those documents we've done before. And I think now we have this like industry group, we can make sure we clearly push it specifically to this wedding industry group through Kathy and her team, because it's in a way more pertinent to you guys than the general public.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that we're going to have to wrap it up here. I know there's been one more question. I don't know if y'all have time to answer that one, but that would have to be the last one, I think.
I did see one more from Meg, and that's the same guidance that the restaurants are using. So if a restaurant has guidance that they could operate with up to 100 people, if they have that capacity operating as a restaurant, that's what the state guidance is at right now. And it's up to the restaurant and the people doing that to ensure everyone's safety by following the guidelines.
And as a reminder, if a restaurant does have that capacity, that counts everybody that's in that space, right? All the people cooking and all the people serving and all that. So anyway, okay. Well, thank you again, everybody, for attending. Thank you for Fletch, Tim, and Jessica. Thank you, Beth, Daniel, and Jana on our team. We're happy to convene these gatherings, and we'll keep you posted. We will, again, as I said, we'll post this recording and the documents or the list that, or links that Tim and Fletch shared. And good luck, everybody. Stay well. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Bye.